Okay, well, welcome out tonight. We're going to talk about the Descendancy View research at FamilySearch. And we're going to talk a little bit about how to use that Descendancy View to its maximum ability. So this lesson is going to cover what doing Descendancy research is all about. We'll talk a little bit about duplicates and tree because we've always got to stay aware of that, and especially if we're adding names in to tree. We'll talk a little bit about how the Descendancy View works, and then we'll actually go through several cases and just show you what you do when you're working Descendancy research with some real examples. Okay, so what is Descendancy research? Descendancy research is when you research the descendants of your ancestors. We know that our primary responsibility is to do our ancestors. The trouble with that is, for many of us who've had family members that have been doing genealogy for a long time, the ancestors are getting harder and harder to find. And if we only concentrated on our ancestors, we would never be finding anybody. And so we need to go look the other direction and talk about researching the descendants of our ancestors. And this is a great way to help a person that has, like I have, like a fairly full tree. Where I have brick walls, they really are brick walls. And so I can't do an awful lot expanding my tree. Once in a while I find somebody, but it's nowadays it's far and few between. And so descendancy research is where I spend most of my time when I'm trying to add people into FamilySearch. Okay, but you might say, but aren't they all done? Meaning all the descendants are really all done, aren't they? Well, the thing is, if you take one of your ancestors, or you take one of your ancestral lines, let's say, and go back 8 generations, you're going to find that those people that are 8 generations back could easily have as many as 500,000 descendants. And so there's this really no way that all those people have been found for all of your 8th generation ancestors. You actually have 124 pairs of 8th generation ancestors. And now many of them will share descendancy with other 8th generation ancestors. But technically, you've got about 500,000 names for people that descend from each one of those 124 pairs of ancestors. And so there's a lot of people out there in your descendancy, a lot more than you could ever imagine. And it's physically impossible that they've all been found. Some lines you might feel that way, but I'm sure you can find lines in just about anybody's tree where it's fairly easy to find new names. Okay. And so it is impossible that all these descendants have been found and their temple work done. Okay. So in this lesson, we're going to help you find your aunts, your uncles, your cousins, your spouses, and their spouses, and their children. That's what descendancy research is. Ancestral research is when you go up the tree, and descendancy research is when you go down. Descendancy research, though, is not when you go down into your cousins and then go to one of their spouses and start going up that spouse's tree. That is not what the brethren want us to do. Those people, the people that are the ancestors of the spouses of our aunts and uncles and cousins, are not our responsibility. Those are not people that we're supposed to be doing temple work for. But we can work our way down and do the temple work for those people.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Can we do their spouses, just not go back up?
Yeah, that's the thing. You can, that's why it says right here, do their aunts, uncles, cousins, their spouses, and their children.
Got it. Thank you.
Sure. That's a touchy question. And I realize that technically, if you go in and you click on how I'm related, you're going to find that you can if you really want to do it, you can probably find a way you're related to a lot of those spouses too. But technically, we're just going to say we're not going to do that tonight. We'll just concentrate on doing true descendancy work. Okay, duplicates. And why should we discuss this? Well, there's thousands. I don't know if thousands is accurate. I'd say probably millions of duplicates in tree. There's 1.2 or 3 billion names in there. So it wouldn't be inconceivable that there's a million duplicates. I would think that those duplicates would disappear and eventually we'd run out of them, but they never seem to, because people keep bringing in and putting new names in tree, or they're putting in their pedigrees using GEDCOMs, and we just keep remanufacturing duplicates as fast as we merge them away. And so, you know, when we put anytime we put a person in tree, even if the system says it's okay and there's no duplicate according to the system, don't sit back and think that everything's fine. You're going to want to check and check yourself, so that you might find, and you often will, you'll find duplicates there that don't qualify as duplicates as far as FamilySearch is concerned. And there's a reason for that. FamilySearch, when they first came out with that new FamilySearch program, they were very generous in looking for duplicates. They figured that, you know, they would give you people that might be the same person, not somebody they thought for sure was, but just might be. But then we would use our wisdom to decide whether or not there really was a duplicate there. The trouble was, the way the people interpreted that is many people said, well, if FamilySearch says these are duplicates, they must be duplicates, even if they don't look like they're the same person. And so they went ahead and merged anything FamilySearch said to merge. And so the church realized we've got to change things. So they've made their approach a lot more conservative, to where when they tell you there's a duplicate now, most of the time it probably really is. But then that ignores a lot of people that are in fact duplicates, but they just look different. And so, you know, for a record to come up as a duplicate, it has to meet a certain criteria, and it goes through a logarithm that the computer works on and gives a score to the match. And if the score is a high enough number, then the church will say, okay, this is a match. And what they do is they look at a lot of factors on the records. And when the two records have the same exact value in a field like name, they'll give you full credit for a match on that part of it and give you a certain number of points. And they'll go through all the different factors for the person. And when they're done, they'll decide by the number, the score that the two records have, whether it's probably a match or not. So what I want to do is show you a little bit about what they're talking about. We're mainly going to focus on dates and places for the different events, and relationships, because these are the two things that FamilySearch looks at to determine if two records are a match. So here's two records. Got a John Brown on top, and we got a John Anderson Brown down below. So take a minute and kind of look at these two records and think to yourself about how they're alike and how they're different. And then I'll explain what would happen when the computer goes to match these. I'll give you a few seconds to look this over. Okay, so the computer's ready to do its point gathering. It looks at the names. One's John Brown, one's John Anderson Brown. Those are not actual matches. They're close, but they're not a full match. So it'll give you a partial point value for name. Birth, the top guy is born about 1873, Missouri. The bottom guy has a full date and a county and state. Again, they're somewhat close, but they're going to get a lesser point value because they're not the same. Death, the top guy has no death. The bottom guy has a death, so they'll get no value whatsoever for death because the top one has no death date, so they get no credit for deaths. Now, top guy has parents, the bottom guy doesn't, so they don't get any credit for parents. And then when it comes to spouses, the bottom guy has a spouse and a marriage date and a state, and the top guy has no spouse. So again, they get no points. So these two records, even though they probably are representing the same person, in fact, they are, I just doctored it up a little bit, they're not going to be shown as duplicates because there's too much difference between the two records. And so this is what we're dealing with. FamilySearch is afraid to give you these two as a match because there's not enough things there that are the same for both of them. And so the point value for their match is a very low score. And they would be not a match as far as FamilySearch is concerned. So this is why we want to go out and go looking, because we can analyze things more fully than the computer can. Okay, so are they duplicates? Well, they are, because I made the top one up out of the bottom one and took some stuff out of the bottom one, like the parents. But the point is, they could be, and they, in this case, they really are. Okay, so my thoughts on duplicates. Generally, the more information you put on a record, the better you have of matching it up with duplicates, unless the duplicate that's out there is one that has no information except maybe the name and the spouse. So there are times where you might actually want to test looking for a duplicate by putting out very little information when you look for a duplicate. But in most cases, the duplicate starts showing up when you start adding more information to your record. So try adding more sources. It'll get more details into your record. And adopt the attitude that when I put a record in tree, unless I can't find a duplicate, there will be a duplicate out there. And so I'm going to always look for a duplicate, as much as I really don't want to find them, because, hey, I want to add new names. But, the important thing is that we get everybody identified and tied into their families correctly. And if your duplicate is floating around tree and not connected to their family, then that's as important as adding a new record to tree, really. And the bottom line is, always we want one record for each person. And that's got to be our goal. And we can't let that be pushed to the side in our efforts to try to add new people into tree. Okay, Descendancy View. What does it show? Okay, when you first want to see your Descendancy View, you've got to go up to the different tree views that you'll see. And this is what you find on the top of the screen. In the drop down of the different views, Descendancy's down there near the bottom. Now, this is supposed to be tree views, and it is a view of the tree. It's just a different form of a tree. Landscape, portrait, and fan chart, and even first ancestor are all ancestral views. And Descendancy View is the other way. It's the descendancy down from an ancestor. But that's where you find it. Now that you've found it, there are options of what to do. Now, they used to call this options. Now all they have are the little sliders. When you click on the sliders, you now see what they used to call as options. And the first thing on Descendancy View is you have an option to choose how many generations to see. Now, the system can only put up so many people in the initial build of this descendancy chart. And that's why they cut it off at 4 generations. It is possible that you'll have a family that's so well filled in that if you say, I want to see 4 generations, you may get an error message that says, hey, there's just too many people there. And there's a way to overcome that by clicking on the little caret symbols that by people's names, and we'll show you that a little later. but it's set for 2 generations to begin with, the person that you're on and their children. If you want to see 4 generations, you got to click the 4. That's one of the things. The other thing is you get to filter how much of the things that you can see that you really want to see. And as members of the church in the Descendancy View, I want to see the temple icon because that's the primary reason I'm in there. I'm also going to want to see if there are record hints because that's really important. I'm going to want to see data problems. I like to see the data problems because, quite frankly, they're usually pretty easy to fix. Even beginners can often fix them. A lot of times it's just you need to have a standardized date or place, and that's all that's wrong. And then I want to see the spouses. The other things about inverting colors, portraits, research suggestions, I don't think we really need those, especially the portraits. It's cute to see portraits, but they take up a heck of a lot of space on the screen and really string this thing out. So the 4 blued checked items are the ones I'd recommend that you do. So now let's just talk about things for a little bit. The temple icons. Green means there's ordinances ready for reserving. Blue means everything's been reserved and either other people have reserved them and not shared them, or they're yours that you have shared with the temple. And that will turn it blue. If it's orange, that means there needs to be more information. I like those because oftentimes it's something that can be fixed real easy. And then actually on the Descendancy View, you will not see the gray. It's just going to be blank. So you have to think, if I don't see anything about ordinances, that means it's done. Everywhere else in tree, when it's done, it'll show gray. But on the Descendancy View, it's just blank. Okay, the blue record hints should become your best friend because that is the easy way to add records to your people. Record hints are supposedly about 95% accurate. Very rarely are you going to come across a hint that doesn't apply to the person, and you can mark it as doesn't apply. But 95% of the time, it probably will work for that person. It probably really is that person. And this is the easiest way to add new names into tree. So, always be careful. There's always a chance they aren't for this person, but they identified these and marked them as record hints because there's an extremely high possibility that they are. And then the data problems are often easy to fix. It's just, you have to do a little cleaning up for the record. A few times they're very major, like a child born before their parents were born, things like that. But a lot of them are just missing a birth date, or they just don't have standardized dates and places. And you may occasionally, when you click on one, you'll see the little message that says possible duplicates. See, I clicked on this person that had a green temple, has a green temple, but it says here there's a possible duplicate. If you're working with a real ranked beginner, I would suggest you just skip it, because you never know when you're getting into this. There's a possible duplicate. You might end up spending the rest of the night merging duplicates, because that one might lead to 2 more and that might lead to 4 more, and you may never get anything else done. So sometimes it's best just to ignore the ones where it says there's a possible duplicate person for this person. When you're working, especially with somebody that's just starting, you don't have a lot of time to work with them, you really don't want to get involved in something that's real complex. Okay, there are the 2 different green temples now. The top temple's the traditional green temple. That means there are ordinances on that person that have never been reserved, or at least are not reserved right now. I should say it that way. They're not reserved. If you grab those ordinances, you'll be given 2 years. to do them. And if you do some of the ordinances, you'll get an extension. So you might get as much as 3 years out of it to get it done. The other green temple is the one with the clock. Those are actually ordinances that have been reserved by someone else. And that person has shared them with the temple. And they used to show as blue. And the only way you could get those released to you before was you had to write to the person and beg them to release these to you. Now, any ordinance you share with the temple will show up as green with the little clock. The little clock just warns people these are already shared with the temple. If you take them, you have 90 days to get them done. And if you don't finish them, they go back to being shared with the temple. But they are available to you, and that means that now you're going to find hundreds of green temples in descendancy charts, many of them with the little clock. And the system is designed so that you can grab those if you want to do them. It's just that you can't grab them and build up your file because you're only going to get 90 days to get them done. Okay. Now, this is a good example of what it looks like when you click on one of those shared temple symbols like this over here on the side. When it shows up, you'll see that this person has endowment, sealing to parents, which are available, but they've already been shared. And it tells you that right here, that you've got 90 days to get it done. When you see that message, that's what it's referring to. You cannot take that name and then turn around and share it with the temple because it's already shared with the temple. You have to do it. That's the only thing you can do with it is get it done if you take it. So if you're not going to do it, don't take it. Okay, and the other thing too, as we go through this, we tend to get kind of careless and say, okay, this person needs their work done, so I'm just going to reserve it and go do it. Well, you really ought to look the person over careful and make sure that the person is free of errors, that there's no hidden duplicates involved, because other people might not be as careful as you are. And so, you're grabbing their work. And so check them out, beware, so that you don't end up duplicating work just because you're excited to get something easy to do. Okay, so the final suggestions for using the Descendancy View. These are things I look at when I'm doing it. I'm going to take advantage of those icons. And not just the temple ones, but the ones about needing more information or errors, things like that. I'm going to look for people in that descendancy that either don't show a spouse, and that's why I want to see spouses in the descendancy. They don't have a spouse, or they show a spouse, but they don't show children. And it shows that they live for what appears to be a long time, because those are often the people that I can more easily add new people to than anybody else. Now, it's true that some people that show a spouse and children might have more children that need to be added. And that's true. But I have found the easiest one is to find people that are shown without a spouse or a spouse but no children. And those are the people that are the easiest, in my view, of building some more names for the tree. Okay. I open up people to look at their person view by clicking on their name one time so the little card comes up, and then doing a right click on the person view and open it up in a new window or a new tab. It will technically, if you just double click on the person from this Descendancy View, it'll overwrite the Descendancy View with this person's page. And then when you hit the back arrow, it'll supposedly take you back to the Descendancy View. I find that to be very dangerous and cumbersome. I'd rather just open up some new tabs for these people I'm working on and leave that view of the descendancy right there untouched. But that's just my preference. Okay, I work the hints. And when I start working on a person, I'll do all their hints. And I work the descent view in sequence. This is important so that you don't skip around and get lost. I either start at the top and work down, but see, that's what most people do. So the real smart thing to do is don't do that. Go down to the bottom and work your way up, because most people stop working on these descent views before they ever get to the bottom. So if you go down to the bottom, you got a better chance, and you'll see that in the first example tonight. But these are the things I suggest. Okay, so let's do some demos, and these are all fairly quick demos. Okay, so I like to start over in helper resources, and especially if I'm working for a patron, I'll go into their helper resources, I'll go onto their pedigree chart, and I'll do the things we've talked about before, looking to see the people born in the US in my case, because I'm good at US research. I'm not that great on Great Britain or Ireland or even Germany that well. So I picked one of my, and this happens to be my ancestry. So I picked one of my great-great-great-grandmothers, I think third great grandmother, Henrietta Sophia. And I actually don't want to do her descendants because she's my ancestor. And I know I've researched her descendants, but she's got some brothers and sisters that I know I haven't done as good a job. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go click on her tree and then go back up the tree to her father. And then I'll do the descendancy chart from him. Or actually, I'll just pull him up. Here's Henrietta Sophia. And I don't want to do her. So I'm going to do her first sister, Anna Christina, because I don't think I've ever worked on Anna's family very much. So I figured this is the less worked tree. I'll probably have more chances to add names. So that's who I'm going to go to. I'm going to click on her, say I want to see her ancestry, so that when I see the ancestry view, I can change it to a descendancy view. So we'll go to Anna Christina's family. And here's her descendancy view. Here's Anna Christina. She married a Philip Kramer. And then these are her descendants. And this little break here is a break where I wiped out several hundred names. And so you see the very top of the list. And like I said, here's the very bottom of the list. And like I said, I want to go down to the bottom because there'll be less people that have ever worked on these names statistically than the others. And right away, the very last name I'm ignoring because there's no hints. There's no temple ordinance thing here, so her work's probably done. There's no hint. But Magdalena Kramer, spelled a little bit different, but this is a German family, so that's fine. And her husband's Alexander Cochran. And they're one of these couples that I like because they're married, but no children showing. If they had had children showing, like here's Lydia, Margaret Cromer, and George McClellan Hood. They're married, and George has this little arrow pointing to the right. That means there's children. If I click on that, it will add the children into this chart. But if there is no little arrow here next to George, the spouse, that means there would be no children in tree. So this tells me right here that Magdalena and Alexander have no children showing. Now they have this little yellow problem situation here. And so what I want to do is pick them and start with them because I can probably resolve the issue without much trouble. Okay, so I'll click on one of them at once, open up the screen, and then do a right click on the person view so that I see a person view. And here's their person view after I first opened it up, and I didn't want to bore you with the stuff. I had to do some merging. It said there's possible duplicates here. So I did some merging and some editing and all of that. And it ended up that in FamilySearch, they have full birth dates and death dates for the two of them. And the death date for Magdalena is much different than what it started out with. And they had one child that showed up in tree. So I had a little bit of a family going here, but it's very unusual back in around 1800 for people to have one child. If they lived a long time, and they lived a good long time, they lived at least 30 years after this child was born. So I want to do a little bit of cheating. So I often will go over to Ancestry just to see if people have done research there, because, you know, there's different people doing research at Ancestry than at FamilySearch, and we can often get some clues. And so I did, and here was a tree that has Alexander and Mary Magdalene or Mary Molly Cromer and Thomas Beale Cochran, because that's the married name. Here's Thomas Beale Cochran. But Thomas Beale Cochran, according to this, has 2, 4, 6 siblings. So there's probably really a bigger family here. And so I'm not going to take those names and put them straight into tree. I'm going to go over to FamilySearch and see what I can do. I want you to realize there's one down here that has no birth or death information, Elizabeth Ann Cochran. Just remember that. So I go back into FamilySearch and I go on Alexander Cochran's page, person page, and there's a hint. It's an Ohio's death hint, which is interesting because he lived in Pennsylvania. But it's for an Alexander Cochran whose wife is Mary Cromer, and the daughter is Elizabeth A. Lees. Here's that Elizabeth. Lees is her married name. She was born in Maryland, and according to the death certificate, in 1834, and died in Ohio in 1917. And she's not in tree. Her name only was over in Ancestry, but now I have full birth and death information with the correct parents. So I'll go and start to source this person. And we know how to use SourceLinker, so we'll not spend a lot of time there. I've already done father and mother. I'm down now to Elizabeth A. Lees. And you'll notice I've changed her last name to Cochran because Lees is her married name. And I want to change this to Cochran so that if there's a duplicate, I have a better chance for the duplicate to show. And so it did not pick up a duplicate. So I'm able to add her in to the tree as the second child in that family. But I immediately start going looking for duplicates. And sure enough, there was one that popped up, even though the system just let me create her and said, oh, there's no duplicates. Well, there is one out there. And the reason for it is the person I'm on has parents and no husband. The duplicate out there has no parents, but has Mr. Lee's, her husband. So we need to merge these two together. And by doing that, she suddenly has a family. She has a husband now and 3 children. But when I looked at them, both James Lees and Elizabeth Cochran needed their work done even after merging. There's still no record, no ordinances done for them. The first child, William, needed all his work. The second child, Mary, still needed to be sealed to her parents. And the only one that was done, and you can assume this is where this original family came from, probably a descendant here joined the church, because Sarah E. Lee has had all her work done, but nobody else. And that's all I had to do. I added one hint, did a couple of merges, and I've got a whole family's worth of names to do. Okay, adding another hint. I went to another person, Nancy Hufford, and it showed that she also had the yellow box for temple, and she had a hint. The orange icon just said needs more information. She had no birth or death dates. But you can't do temple work if you don't have any dates on a person. So the hint is the 1880 census. I wonder what I can pick up off of an 1880 census. Of course, I'm going to be able to pick up a birth date. Now, what is interesting is looking at that census, she's in the home of Noah Bunnell and his wife, but her last name is Hufford, but she's marked as adopted. So that's why her name is different than the parents are in that family. But the point is, we now have a birth date for her, and she now turns green. Of course, I just still want to do more research on her, but technically at this point, she could be reserved. And you could reserve her and then do more work if you wanted to. Or you could just leave her in the tree like this and try to do more work. But that's all it took to add her in, was getting a date on her. Okay, now here's a good example of shared names. I went into this tree and there were a lot of the ordinances with the little clocks. And when you click on them, in this case, this person's never been done at all. And so if you wanted to reserve those, you'd only have 90 days. You'd have to go through all of them. Or you could just say, I want to just reserve, let's say, the baptism and confirmation. If you were a youth and you were doing baptisms at the temple, and you could just reserve those two ordinances. But that's all you have to do on those. But you still should go look at the person and make sure that they are, in fact, a good one to do and don't need more work done. Okay, adding somebody with hints again. I'm on Abraham Mullen, who shows no spouse. And I assume there's probably a birth and death date. We just can't see it because the card popped up. But the first hint is, or the second hint is a marriage record for an Abe Millam. So we look at that, and it's from the same county where he lived. It doesn't show you that in the descendancy, but I know he lived in Wyandotte, Ohio. And he was born like in 1865 or something like that. And so his marriage date, a marriage date for Abe Millam and Wyandotte in 1889 would fit him just fine. Actually, he's 21, so he's probably born about 1868 or thereabouts. And so it's probably most likely him. I could do some more research, but if I finally decide, yes, this is him, I attach that record to him, and he now has a wife. When I go to put Emma Taylor, his wife, from that record in, it shows up that there are a couple of duplicates for her. And you'll often have this happen. And there's two different ones. This is an Emma Taylor with an Abe Mullam, and it just says she was born about January of 1870. And he was born about 1863, which is 5 years off. And then there's another one with her full name, full birth and death information, spouses Millam, and it has her parents. So here's a good example of duplicates in tree for the person I have. Well, I definitely don't want to stick her in tree as another record, or we'll have three. So I would probably pick this one down here, the bottom one, and say that this record matches that record, and they'll stick this record in here. I'll have to merge the Millam with the Millam. Then I'll have to merge this record with this record, and then also merge Abe with Abe. And so I've got about 5 merges altogether, 4 or 5 merges that I have to do, or 3 before I'm done. So I've got several merges to do. When I got done, it was 4 merges. There we go. And when I got done, a lot of the work was done, but Abraham Millam still needed to be sealed to the spouse. The spouse needed her endowment and sealing to her parents. and a ceiling to him. And 2 of the children had work that needed to be done of the 3 kids. The first one and the last one needed to be sealed to parents, and the third one needed to be endowed still. So there were ordinances for 4 different people here from that. And it all came beginning with just that one hint that I attached and then did some merges. So I think this may be about our last example. I've got a Nora Nina Zoll. She lives to 83, but she doesn't show any husband or any kids. And she's got to find a grave hint. And there's a husband listed on that hint. And so when I go look at that hint, it led me to another one, which was a marriage record for a Nora Nina Zoll with Father Ed Zoll, and that's the correct father's name, and Mother Alice Babcock, and a spouse, Thomas Raymond Black. So even though she had no husband showing, I can add a husband. And so that's what I did. And by the time I was finished adding hints, I was able to add a daughter, which they happened to have before they got married, but that's okay. And all 3 of them needed temple work. Okay, I believe this really is the last one. This is the last 7 names on a descendancy chart. And the reason I'm bringing up all of them is right now, you see 1 green temple and you see 7 names, okay? The first 3 names in here were just messed up. And so it took some time to fix that up, to be honest with you. I had to do some research to figure out what they were trying to show and what in the heck was really going on there. My main emphasis was this one family here because they're my ancestors. Abbott, which is the son in this tree of greens, is my ancestor, Abbott Green. And he married a Margaret Abbott. How's that for being confusing? Okay, and they show no children here. So I suspect there's some more. I'll take that back. They are not my ancestors. Their parents are my ancestors. But I thought Abbott Green was an interesting name, so I was working on him. So as I played around with them, by the time I was done adding hints and merging and things like that, the 4 families that were there, you see right now there are 4 families here. I did not expand them for this view because then the page would go too far. But those 4 people have children. Okay, they've got a spouse and they've got children. And so when he got done with this little pedigree that started with 7 people, I ended up with 47 people there. So I added 40 new people into tree. And of those 40 people that I put into tree, well, I didn't really put 47 in because 28 of them had green temples. And they only had 1 before, so that's an addition of 27 people that needed temple work. And all but 2 have never been reserved. So there were a couple of little clock symbol ones, but most of them were brand new into tree. So when people say, well, you can't find any, you really can if you dig around and find the right place to go looking. And you can see here that I've still got more hints to process. Grant Bybee would say, hey, I'm not done yet. I still got more to do here. So really, it's very easy. Are there any questions on how to do this? I just really like using this Descendancy View.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
I'm still somewhat new to family history.